So I finally saw John Carpenter's 1978 horror film Halloween, and the movie has aged exceptionally well. While it's not exactly a scary movie by today's standards, it's very good at capturing the ear and disturbance of some great danger lurking in the shadows. That danger, of course, being Michael Myers. He is such a simple character, and yet it works so well because of how unpredictable he is and how evil he's amped up to be.
Death has come to your little town, Sheriff.
But I spent a lot of time thinking about the movie, specifically about Michael Myers, and I've been asking myself, is he really that simple? I don't really watch slasher films, let alone horror movies in general, but I really like this movie, and with everything it has to offer, its technical aspects, likable characters, great performances, calculated pacing, the thing I walked away thinking about most was Michael Myers. I always heard that slasher films were about punishing teenagers for having sex, how they're about getting naked women to scream bloody murder, but this film, the one that started the slasher genre, didn't seem to suggest that at all. Maybe later films do this, but I walked away from Halloween thinking something entirely perpendicular. There is more to Michael Myers than just being a psycho who kills babysitters, and it's not to exploit women for the sake of appeasing us guys. Michael Myers, as a character and a shape, is a vessel for the film to say something about society. So, what is Michael Myers? Let's recap the story very quickly, and I'm not going to use the sequels or the reboots or the sequel reboot, just the original film, because that was the original slasher, and that's what matters most. Needless to say, spoilers ahead. Haddonfield, Illinois, 1963. The film opens up on a first-person shot of someone watching teenagers do sex stuff. They grab a kitchen knife, find the girl, and stab them. Turns out it was a small child named Michael Myers who just stabbed his sister Judith to death. He's locked up in a mental institution. 15 years later, cynical psychiatrist Dr. Sam Loomis freaks out when he realizes Michael had miraculously escaped the institution, even stealing a car in the process. Dr. Loomis is fully convinced Michael is pure evil and hunts him down for the rest of the movie. Michael kills a car mechanic and steals his uniform. He later robs a store for its tools and a mask. We're introduced to the main three girls: Annie, the funny, sarcastic one; Linda, the totally blonde one; and the goody two-shoes protagonist, Laurie Strode. Michael Myers stalks the teenagers and one by one kills Annie, Linda, and Linda's boyfriend. Laurie faces off with Michael, stabs his neck, stabs his eye, stabs his chest with a kitchen knife, but alas, Michael Myers does not die. Dr. Loomis swings in and shoots Michael directly 6 times.
I shot him 6 times!
Then he falls off the second floor of the house. And after all that, the movie ends to reveal that he is gone, and likely still alive. Somewhere. Anywhere. Everywhere. And that's it. 2 notable things about the film. One is that it's one of the first horror films to bring horror home. Most horror films before Halloween kept the spooky stuff far away from the house, and instead inside the castle, or near that creepy house on the hill. But Michael Myers does invade that safe place we call home, and what is terrifying is the feeling that he could show up on your doorstep. Second, the bad guy doesn't die and isn't caught. That wasn't considered typical at the time, especially for a horror film, which would normally have the monster dead by the end of the story. But here, there is no resolve. The villain gets away with murder, can't be killed, and is still roaming. These observations astounded me, and from what I concluded, they are very much related. There is a symbolism to Michael Myers being an undying force that permeates the homes of even small towns in Illinois. But what is he symbolic of? My theory involves Michael Myers being the central key to this film, though before I can prove that, I'll need to address certain discussions had in academia, because a lot of slasher critics have focused mainly on the teenagers and their relationship with the killer. With Halloween, the focus is on Laurie Strode and her relationship with Michael Myers. There have been discussions on whether or not Halloween and the films influenced by it are sexist in nature, focusing on the pleasure of the male audience specifically. Nicholas Rogers wrote a book about Halloween, The Holiday, and when talking about Halloween the movie, among other slashers, he mentions the mainstream contempt for their apparent glorification of violence, their misogyny, and their sadistic voyeurism. Some suggest that the slasher genre, starting with Halloween, have been a means to subject sexually active women to horrible violence, with the exception of the quote-unquote innocent virgin. Carol J. Clover is the person who coined the term the final girl, which refers to the final girl to face off against the villain, in this case Laurie Strode. Usually the protagonist of the film and a lady, the final girl is defined by her masculine interests, her sexual reluctance, her apartness from other girls. She is often a tomboy who either doesn't have sex or is sexually unavailable, and in Halloween, Laurie isn't extremely effeminate and doesn't have sex in the movie, nor does she actively pursue it. In this theory, she is seen as having a moral high ground over her sexually active friends. However, John Carpenter, the director himself, rejects this notion, stating that Laurie is the most sexually frustrated character of the main trio. He directly connects Laurie and Michael Myers by saying she and the killer have a certain link: sexual repression. And this is a big ingredient for my take on the film. Michael Myers is a sexually repressed character. I'm going to talk more about this in a bit, but basically, watching his sister engage in sexual activity triggered feelings and sensations he couldn't understand. The future evil entity to be reacted the only way he could process: violently. Laurie Strode is also, in a sense, sexually repressed. She does like boys.
Well, you could ask Dick Baxter. He'd go out with you.
I'd rather go out with Ben Tramer.
And she even envies her friends for getting laid.
Everybody's having a good time tonight.
Her lack of sexual activity isn't so much a definitive moral choice as it is a circumstance from low confidence. Laurie is deathly shy, hardly leaving her house over babysitting little Tommy Doyle. But the film doesn't paint her as a hero for it, nor is she rewarded for being sexless. Her lack of confidence kept her from crossing paths with the killer, not any moral choice or status of purity. When finally faced with Michael, she resorts to violence as well, in what seems like a sudden boost of confidence. The idea Carpenter is painting is that Laurie and Michael repressed their sexuality, and that energy comes out aggressively because of it. However, in response to this, Clover suggests that Carpenter isn't painting the whole picture. She further defines the final girl as a male surrogate who adopts masculine attributes to appease male audiences. According to Clover, the two share more than just repression. They share masculinity. And this, Clover says, is meant to put at ease what is called the castration anxiety, the Freudian theory that men fear castration, and perhaps fear women because they are, in a sense, castrated. Women ain't got no dick, and that makes them scary. So by giving Laurie characteristics that are usually attributed to male roles, it would make her like one of the guys, and not so ladylike. Therefore, the ending isn't Laurie versus Myers, it's two dudes duking it out in some meta homoerotic roleplay. Now, for my personal take on what Clover is saying, I think breaking down the role of gender in horror films is very important. But I don't think gender and the scale of masculinity is central to Halloween's theme, nor do I think it is simply trying to appease to a male audience, and I'm not the only one who disagrees with Clover. Barbara Creed, in her book The Monstrous Feminine, doesn't follow the idea that the slasher heroine, a person who is usually represented as resourceful, intelligent, and dangerous, is some sort of pseudo-man like Clover suggests. Creed's argument is that the woman is still a woman in and out, diegetically and narratively, and that Halloween is trying to provoke the castration anxiety and make people uncomfortable, not the other way around. So if that's the case, and it's not about making men feel comfortable, what about Laurie Strode? Is she a male surrogate, or something else? Jamie Lee Curtis, the actress who played Laurie Strode, said the film has nothing to do with promiscuous girls getting killed and virgins being saved. It was the choice of choosing a character to hang the movie on, and they named her Laurie Strode. Laurie being identified as the final girl was a circumstance that Curtis said was developed into a trope through repetition and a replication of it. Later slasher films may contain the final girl as defined by Clover, but Laurie Strode is not the same archetype, because simply put, she is just a normal teenager. She is shy like a teenager can be, and also sexually curious like a teenager can be. Each of the main girls express varying degrees of sexual curiosity that is normal for developing young adults. Despite the idea that Halloween punishes sexually active teenagers, the film doesn't frame the teenagers as in the wrong. They live normal lives as high school kids, doing rebellious things like smoking pot, hiding pot from their parents, talking about boys, talking about sex, and of course, having sex with boys. In all cases except the last, this applies to Laurie. Even in their escapades, the girls strategize so as to not completely abandon the responsibility they have towards the kids they are babysitting. They're far more competent and realistic teenagers than the bikini-wearing volleyball players that women were typecast at the time, and after the time, even today. These female characters aren't made to suffer for reasons like voyeurism, yet ironically this film is still cited as the starter of that trend, which is far more prominent in its imitations. These are normal, innocent teenagers who are tragically killed or nearly killed at the hands of Michael Myers, and if they live to tell the tale, they are traumatized forever. So if they are just normal teenagers, what then is Michael Myers? Let's dissect Michael Myers into two categories: Michael Myers, the character, and Michael Myers, the shape. Michael Myers as a character is obviously troubled, totally lacks empathy, but more specifically, holds an unhealthy sexual repression. His actions in the movie can be traced to his exposure and confusion towards the sexual acts of his sister. Sexuality is a scary enigma to Michael, and thus he reacts to it violently. After murdering his sister and the mask is pulled from his head, Michael's face is frozen, and the moment he encounters his parents is treated like a freeze frame, except zooming out. Michael is stuck in this place of fear and confusion forever. The adult Michael is essentially a child in a man's body, who can drive a car for whatever reason. But what makes him childlike is his underdeveloped sense of sexual understanding, which has evolved into a hateful rage towards the unknown realm of sex. The key difference between his repression and Laurie Strode's sexual frustration is that Laurie Strode is self-aware of her repression. She is conscious of her desires and her obstacles. Despite not pursuing sex, she is visibly jealous of her friends, audibly heard singing songs about spending a night with someone to make love.
I wish I had you all alone.
Her obstacle is her prevailing anxiety. Michael Myers does not have this self-awareness, and as an adult, probably still has no idea what his feelings are. His murder of Linda's boyfriend shows his curiosity towards the sexual, but without comprehension of what it really is. He can only associate it with the actions of his sister, which he projects onto his victims, in one case literally, when he steals Judith's tombstone and plants it along Annie's body. Innocent lives fall before him because he projects his fear, his hatred, and lack of understanding onto those who bring him back to that fateful moment 15 years prior. Well, except for the car mechanic, I guess. But that is who Michael Myers is. What I'm proposing is what Michael Myers is, and what he represents. There is a reason why Michael Myers is credited simply as the Shape. Because for all intents and purposes, narratively speaking, that is all he is, a shape. He is considered an entity of evil that must be stopped at all costs, something Dr. Loomis swears by.
What was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
The expert psychologist considers this shape evil, not even a man.
This isn't a man.
This is a direct message from the narrative. Michael Myers is something that must be stopped because of the actions and dangers drawn from his sexual repression. What symbolically makes him so evil and so dangerous? Michael Myers is the incarnation of sexual ignorance, the failure to understand sexuality in its nature. His character is sexually repressed. However, he as a symbol, a shape, is formed from the effects of this repression on a societal level. His inability and disregard for sexual understanding is the driving force of death upon innocent women and men because sexual ignorance affects everyone. This isn't a cautionary tale about teenagers who are punished for having sex, but a tragedy about the lives affected by those who project this failure onto others when sexual repression goes unchecked and sexuality itself is never explored nor discussed. The ambiguity, The confusion, the sheer anger that comes from that failed inner communication is something very real in our society. The various discourses concerning toxic masculinity, rape culture, patriarch impositions on gender power dynamics all connect to sexual ignorance and the effects thereof. Michael Myers is the embodiment of these issues, combined into a sexually stunted and repressed figure with no coherent motive, because ignorance itself has no motive. It simply exists, and it can hurt people. That is why the Doctor is so adamant about stopping Michael, because this ignorance is what makes him pure evil. Dr. Loomis's pursuit of Michael is an allegory for the pursuit of eliminating that sexual ignorance before it infects society. Just as Michael represents the doom of sexual ignorance, Dr. Loomis stands for sexual coherence and education. A reoccurring aspect of the film is how oblivious the adults seem to be for one reason or another. The parents are absent or too busy to look after their kids. The members of the mental institution seem to have no idea how Michael, the evil representing sexual ignorance, managed to escape unchecked.
Your precautions weren't strong enough. You should have told somebody.
I told everybody.
Nobody listened.
Even Dr. Loomis has trouble keeping track of the most dangerous man to arrive in Haddonfield. A silent danger is lurking among society, and the psychologist is the only one trying to defeat it. After all, he is the only one who really knows what Michael truly is. The story is a chess game between the understanding and the ignorance of sexuality, the former calculating and morally guided, the latter almost random and without any sense of morality. Such ignorance as Michael shapes himself to be is dangerous and undying. It is powerful and arguably impossible to completely destroy, but that doesn't mean nothing should be done to stop it. Halloween is making a statement about what figuratively enters the home when society doesn't confront or educate on the subject of sex. It mutates into toxic masculinity, into a culture that enables behaviors leading to sexual harassment and assault. And the film argues that these threats embedded into Michael's symbolism must be dealt with and destroyed. Yet regardless of its attempts to contribute to such conversations, it is still cited as perpetuating misogynistic tropes in the slasher genre, despite being the first of its kind and coding a message that tackles misogyny. It seems like a case of loss in translation, really just a bad game of telephone. History may remember how Halloween influenced horror films more so than what it was actually trying to say. Look no further than Joss Whedon's Cabin in the Woods, which satirically breaks down the tropes that have evolved from slasher films, one of them being the final girl, another being the apparent consequence of young adults engaging sexually. It goes to show that the slasher film did indeed fall into a cycle of repetitions and replication, to the point that these derivative tropes are the ones satirized in Joss Whedon's film. Perhaps everything I said can bring some new light on how Halloween is seen today. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, but even if it's just another theory dismissed by Carpenter himself, maybe it's still worth considering what horror films can bring to social discourse. Horror was always about exposing mankind's anxiety to itself, its fears manifested into a monster. What makes Michael Myers so unique as a movie monster is how he is almost human. He looks and walks like a human, and is at least in the story a human character. But the true shape of Michael Myers is the evils that mankind has yet to face. He lives because we still fear the unknown, even hate the unknown, regardless if that unknown is ourselves. He lives because the unknown is ignored, left to wander unattended, knocking on someone's door.